You want to write a book, but with the slim odds of getting picked up by a traditional publisher, is self-publishing a better way to go than that traditional publisher route? What if you could publish a book, keep control over every detail, and actually earn more profit for each copy sold? Today, I'm talking with Michele DeFilippo, a publishing expert with over 50 years of experience who's seen it all, from traditional publishing to the disruptive rise of Amazon's print-on-demand model, all of it. In today's episode, Michele shares how she pivoted her business after technology transformed the industry and explains her process for helping authors bring their manuscripts to life. You'll hear about what it takes to create a professional book that can stand alongside bestsellers and learn the mistakes to avoid if you want your self-published book to make an impact. Michele's journey from typesetting to full-service publishing management means she knows exactly what it takes to produce a high-quality book. She's here to help aspiring authors navigate the complex landscape of self-publishing and avoid common pitfalls. Welcome to the Online Business Launchpad podcast. I'm your host, Trudy Rankin. And today I have got Michele DeFilippo with me, and Michele is someone who helps people publish their own book. Now, I know that for people listening, you're going to be interested in what she has to say, because I suspect that there is a book inside just about everyone that they would love to help get out. But if you look at the traditional publishing process, your chances of getting a traditional book publisher to publish your book is like almost as good as winning lotto is here in Australia. So without further ado, I just want to say welcome to the podcast, Michele, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Trudy.
So let's go ahead and start like we used to do for my podcast guests. I'd love to know a little bit more about you, who you are, what's your backstory, and how did you get to the place where you are today in terms of helping people?
I've been in publishing in one form or another for more than 52 years now. So it's quite a long story. I don't know how much time you want to spend on it. I started at Crown Publishers in New York City, where I grew up in 1972. And then about a few years after that, my husband and I got the bright idea to move to Phoenix, Arizona. And we were young and stupid, and we made the assumption that we could find jobs very easily in Phoenix like we always could in New York. But that didn't turn out to be the case. So after a number of years of working for minimum wage, I opened up my own typesetting business in 1980. And we worked for publishers and magazines and corporations doing annual reports and even everyday stuff like car ads and brochures, things like that. And that went on until 1993, when technology disrupted everything. Steve Jobs invented the Macintosh, and that put every typesetting business in the world out of business within a few years. So I go back to square one and figure out, okay, what do I do next? So I freelanced for a number of years. And then right around 2001, I started 1106 Design, because that's about the time Amazon came on the scene and made it possible for anyone who wanted to publish a book without working with a publisher. And that was right up my alley. I knew how to do that. So I thought, okay, let's see where this goes. And so ever since 2001, I've been the owner of 1106 Design, helping authors.
That's really interesting, because here in Australia, I think we would call a typesetting business, we would call it a printing business, where basically people but now you take your files to them and get them to turn it into really lovely stuff. So it's interesting to me. So I'm going to follow up with a question that's slightly different to probably where we thought we were going to go with this, but I'm curious because I think it's pertinent, particularly to people who are finding their work, whether it's a job or whether they're freelancers, disrupted by technology yet once again. And I'm talking about AI and how AI has come in, and the way people are using it is starting to seriously impact on a lot of writers, a lot of editors, a lot of people who would normally be able to quickly and easily pick up work, even quite skilled people. And I'm finding, and that's what I'm hearing in the industry, that it's becoming harder and harder to do. Can you just speak just a little bit more about how you went about dealing with that disruption? You said you put all the typesetting businesses out of business over a period of years. Talk to us a little bit more about the process and the thought process that you went through to actually deal with that disruption.
I was very slow to recognize what was happening. That was the biggest problem because I would follow up with some customers that I hadn't heard from in a while, and they would say, "Oh, I bought a Macintosh, so we won't be needing your services anymore." But a big part of me didn't want to believe that that was what was going to happen to everyone. And part of it was that the early Macintosh computers did not produce what we would have thought of at the time as good, beautiful, crafted typesetting. So to me, it seemed like this is just a toy. This is just a fad. It's going to go away. And then over a number of years, I realized that it wasn't going to go away. And I ultimately wound up taking apart a $35,000 typesetting machine and throwing it in a dumpster. So it's even hard to imagine the pricing back then, right? Imagine paying $32,000 even today for your desktop computer. It's unthinkable. And that was in 1980 dollars.
Ouch.
Yeah, ouch is right. We used to pay $125 for a single font.
And so much has changed since then. So you say it took you a while to recognize the writing on the wall. And once you did recognize it, how did you move forward into finding a new way of basically running a business or finding a business?
At first, it was a step backwards. I closed the typesetting business and then went back to what I knew, which was freelance graphic design. And I did that for a while. And I just stumbled on a brochure in the library for the Arizona Book Publishing Association. And I went to a couple of meetings and I learned then that we had something called Amazon all of a sudden. So there's bookends there, right? Because the new technology of which Amazon was a part actually put me into my new business, even though Steve Jobs' Macintosh technology put me out of business a number of years before. So it was interesting in that regard.
That's really interesting because there's quite a road, quite a journey to get to that place. So once you found out that there was a new way of doing things, just talk to us a little bit about the process that you use to help people, because it would be different, a little bit different now maybe than what it was when you first started your business. But what's your process that you use now to help people who have that book inside them? They would really like to get it out, but they want it to look good. People want to be proud of whatever it is they produce. So just talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. When self-publishing first started and I was going to those Arizona Book Publishing Association meetings, everyone understood that the author was going to be the publisher, right? It was expected that the author would do what traditional publishers did. They would hire experts to produce a quality book. And the benefit of them making that investment would be that when a book was sold, they would keep all of the revenue from book sales instead of sharing some of that revenue with a publisher. That was the pitch, if you will, for self-publishing. In the last 20 years, things have gotten much more complicated. And now we have companies that call themselves publishers, but they charge the author to produce the book, and they also take revenue out of their pocket on the back end when a book sells. And that's not advantageous at all to the author. Today, an author can find any model they want, but I would hope that they will remember that real self-publishing means you are in charge and you control your book and you should get all the revenue in return for an investment.
I find that interesting because, and also it's a really powerful argument for actually self-publishing, assuming that you can find somebody who can help you produce a quality book. But I'm just thinking, my brain's ticking away because this is a space that I've got some interest in. And because if you look at the publication of it, yes, you get to keep all of the revenue. But when it comes to the distribution of it, you're paying someone somehow to distribute it and I'm thinking in the back of my mind, I'm thinking Amazon. How do people get your book? Physically get it in their hands. So can you talk just a little bit about the world of actually getting books into people's hands?
Sure. At the beginning of self-publishing, before Amazon existed, you would have to print 5,000 or so books in order to get a good unit price, and then you would have to hopefully sell every book that you printed. Now we have the wonderful thing called print on demand, so that a book is not printed until it's sold. So there's no out-of-pocket expense for the author in terms of inventory. right? There are two expenses that you can't avoid. One is the retail discount. Amazon, people don't know it generally, but Amazon takes 40% of the cover price. That's how they stay in business. Nothing wrong with that. They're providing a service. They're putting your book in front of millions of people, right? And then you have to pay for the print-on-demand printing. And then the net revenue comes to you, the author. But with these intermediate publishing companies I mentioned, they charge you to produce the book, and they take an additional fee out of your pocket when that book is sold. In addition to the retail discount, in addition to the printing costs, they take $2, $3, $5 for themselves and pay the authors very little.
So basically, it's almost more, I'm just thinking out loud and trying to find something to compare it to. It's saying to somebody, you're going to partner with me and I have to pay you up front for the help that you're going to give me. And I'm going to give you a cut out of every book I sell. So that's an interesting model. Can you compare how you do that to what we just talked about?
Sure. We're basically publishing project managers. So we provide a vetted team, reliable services, and hand-holding throughout the whole process to get your book ready for distribution. Then we upload it into your print-on-demand accounts so that you get the sales reports, you get the deposits to your bank account, and there's nobody else taking any portion of that revenue. We don't take a penny of your revenue from sales. We do charge for services. We have to. Right. But we're not taking additional money out of your pocket every time you sell a book. If you think about it, say, for instance, you owned a restaurant, right? You go to the grocery store, you buy the food, you fix a plate food for the customer. You don't pay the grocery store again every time you serve a plate of food, right? You pay the grocery store once. That's what we do.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. And for anybody who's listening and you're thinking about doing a book, having that kind of a model and knowing that you're going to be getting all of the revenue into the future, you have to weigh that up about how much you want to, what you're paying for right now for the services. And project management is something that's near and dear to my heart because I have a phase in my life where I was a project manager and I'm still a certified project manager. And I know that it is a skill that you need if you want to do things lovely and smoothly and have an efficient operation. So I'm going to come back to what I think that the listener would be interested in, and because I've got a few questions for you about the business side, which if we have time, we'll come back to. But for people who are listening and who are interested in potentially creating their own book, what would they need to have already in place before they came to you for help?
Okay, our services would start typically when you have a manuscript that's completed to the best of your ability. It doesn't have to be perfect because then we would pick up with editing and so forth and polish it up for you. But let's say you should be finished writing before you come to us.
So would you have had, so if it would, let's just say it was me, would I have needed to have had somebody already come in and edit my manuscript?
No, we do offer the editing services. We start with an editorial evaluation to figure out which level of editing it may need. Sometimes it's a higher level, what we would call substantive editing, where things need to be rearranged and structured in a better way than you may have been able to do. And there's no shame in that, by the way. We can't be experts at everything. That's what editors do. Most often it's copy editing, just a cleanup of punctuation and grammar and redundancies that you may have missed and mistakes that you may have missed because you wrote the manuscript in various sessions and not all in one day. We once had a situation where a fictional character was killed off in an early chapter and came back to life toward the end of the book. That was probably the funniest mistake we ever found. But it makes the point that you do need a fresh pair of eyes on it when you finish.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so easy to miss things. Even if you've looked at it 3 times, you still pick up something after you published it. That's annoying. So somebody can just bring you a manuscript that's to the best of their ability.
Yeah.
And then talk us through the process. What happens after that?
Like I said, we'll start with the editorial evaluation and the copy editing. We will show the author every edit that the editor suggests. So there's no worry. Sometimes authors worry that an editor is going to change their voice or change their words, and that's very stressful for them. We don't change a thing without your permission. We'll send you a document filled with track changes, and you can accept or reject each one of those changes. The final decisions are up to you. But of course, we hope you take the editor's advice for the most part, but it's always up to you. So there will be no surprises there. While the editing is going on, we'll typically design the cover, work back and forth with you with that. And then once the editing is complete, we'll move on to interior design and interior typesetting, which is an old-fashioned word now, hard for me to believe, but now people call it formatting. But actual book typesetting is very involved and much more detailed than formatting. So we do that. And then we'll proofread the pages that have been made to make sure that nothing has slipped through everybody's eyes before that. And we always find things, even no matter how many times the author has read the book and how many times the editor went through it, there's always things that don't make an appearance until the book is properly typeset. It's remarkable. So then there's usually a few rounds of revisions, and then we get to the point where we upload the files to your print-on-demand accounts, and then we start the ebook after all changes have been made to the print book.
That's really interesting because I did a little tiny experiment a while ago because I looked for something and couldn't find it on Amazon. And I wanted a little, they call them low content. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, low content journal.
Mhm.
I wanted one that I could both write and sketch in and laid out in a specific way. Couldn't find one. And so for those of you listening who have never tried to set up an Amazon self-publishing account or the Kindle direct publishing type of an account, it is an interesting process. So somebody who can help you with that, basically getting all of that stuff set up and the book loaded in and everything filled out, and so that it can go live. Trust me, it is an interesting process. So it can be really useful to have somebody to help you with that. So I'd like to, and then of course, so quick question. So once it's up and loaded, is that the end of it for you, or do you help people with the marketing side?
I introduce people to marketers that I trust, because that's really not where my area of expertise is. And different books require different kinds of marketing strategies. So I hand that off to people who know that.
Yeah, it's quite a thing. And that's another thing that a lot of people don't realize is that you can write all the books you like, but if people don't know that they exist, nobody's going to be buying them. So being able to be put in touch with people who can help with the marketing is really useful because it is an art unto itself.
A lot of people don't realize, I've had this conversation with people, they think, I'll just put my book up on Amazon and that's the end of it. And I remind them that no, Amazon isn't going to do a thing to drive people to your book, not unless you buy Amazon ads. And so it's your job as the publisher to get people to know about your book. And that's why it's important to do it well also, because when people go find your book on Amazon after you tell them about it, Amazon's going to put up the best sellers next to your book. So your book has to look as good as those bestsellers. Otherwise, it will come off as being self-published and risky and maybe not a good idea to that purchaser.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a whole process there that you have in place when you're launching your book. And that is another conversation. Yeah, I just quickly mentioned, I know somebody who's put together a tool that helps with creating Amazon ads, helping to automate that process of creating Amazon ads, because that's, once again, marketing. It's a whole art unto itself, and you need all the help you can get when you're self-publishing. So I'd like to come back to the business side of things a little bit, because I always find it interesting talking to people about how they run their business. Now, you have a team that helps out with the creation of the books and things like that. Do you have employees? Do you use contractors? Do you use freelancers? How do you run that particular side of your business?
I use contractors. And the reason for that is I have 5 editors, designers, proofreaders, and so forth. And by having so many contractors, I can always have someone start pretty much the minute the project arrives. I couldn't do that with employees because nobody would want to wait 6 weeks until the editor got done with their last book. You just can't manage it any other way. So you could think of us as an ad agency where we have the team in place and then we just help the author manage all of the steps and answer all the questions. We'll typically answer 300 messages in the course of finishing a job. So the project management side is a big part of it.
And do you have people who are specifically designated to be the project manager? Is it like an account manager or project manager where they're responsible for making sure that particular book goes through all the steps, even though somebody else is doing the work?
Yeah, I have 2 project managers actually, and then we use an online collaboration system to keep track of all the tasks and all the due dates and so forth.
So just out of sheer curiosity, what system do you use?
Nifty.
Nifty. I haven't heard of that one. I'll have to look it up and see it.
Yeah.
It's like,
We used to use Reich, and then before that we used Basecamp. And every time I see a better idea, I move over.
yeah, because project management, it's really helpful to have a good tool that can help with that. And there's so many out there. So I'm just going to ask a curiosity-based question here. How do you decide that a project management tool is better than the one you've already got?
Usually it'll come down to how much they're charging for guests, right? Because our issue is that authors it takes a long time to do a book. So an author may be with us from 4 months to a year. So unfortunately, we left Reich because they decided they wanted to charge $9 per month per guest. And I couldn't afford that because I've got 70 or 80 people at any given time in the system. So that just I couldn't consider that. So Nifty was relatively new. And for the moment, they're not charging for guests.
Yeah, yeah, that's a problem, isn't it? Just watch the technology and you tend to go from a come on for free, let's do all these things. And then they start to add functionality and they've got to run a business as well. And so pretty soon you're paying for services that used to be free and then it becomes a little bit problematic. So in terms of I'll call it the pipeline, typically how long does it take from the time that somebody says, hey, I've got a manuscript for you, love to have you help me, till their files are loaded up and it's live on Amazon? Typically how long?
We've done over the course of doing 4,000 books now, it's typically 4 months, but it can be shorter. If the book is shorter, if there's a deadline that has to be met, we can, of course, expedite it. But 4 months, it can be 6 months. It really depends on how quickly the author responds when we send them something to approve and how many changes they make. So if I have to say anything over and over again, it's please make sure your book is written before you start production.
And that's a really good point. And so if somebody is working with you with getting their book produced, how much time would they typically need to allocate over that 4-month period to making sure that they are responding to you on a timely basis?
I guess the first step was when they review the edited manuscript, right? That might take some hours for them to go through everything that the editor found. So that might require probably the biggest chunk of time. They would review cover designs, and that probably doesn't take too much time out of their day to decide whether they like something or don't and what they want instead. The next stage would be interior design. Again, that's not too much of a time commitment because they could just look at the samples we send and decide which one they want best and how they want to change it. Then reviewing the typeset proof of the whole book would probably take some time because I recommend at that point, we're sending the typeset pages to our proofreader and to the author at the same time. So I do ask the author to read every word, jot down any changes they see that need to be made. And then when we send them the proofreader's version, then they can compare the two and see if the proofreader found some things that they didn't or vice versa and merge those changes into one document for us to make the corrections. So that's a time chunk there.
And it would also be a little tedious, wouldn't it? I'm thinking out loud here. So you'd want to make sure as an author that you set aside enough time to actually do that and reward yourself when you're done, because that
no kidding.
would be
and time to actually focus and be quiet and think.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing.
Yeah, no distractions. I want to ask a couple of questions because I hadn't really thought about it too much. And I don't know whether other people have really thought about it too much either who might be listening. Can you just talk just a little bit more about the interior design parts and what is that actually? And what are we looking at there?
Sure. This was the way I was trained, right? The book pages have to be designed by somebody before the actual quote unquote formatting or typesetting is done. And that involves just trying to match the voice of the book and the intent of the book. A cookbook is designed different than a history book or a memoir or a novel, but you want to bring some personality into the interior design. At least that's the way we approach it. So you want to pick the right fonts. You want to come up with alternative ways to do something. You want to, maybe the chapter openers have an image of some sort. If there's tables and charts involved, you want to make sure that they all look the same, and they're not just a hodgepodge of things grabbed from the internet somewhere. So there's a lot that goes into the interior design. And then when we get to types, when a design is approved and we get to typesetting the pages, then that's where true typesetting comes into the mix. And that's where a typesetter will meticulously space every line, every word, every paragraph, and obey about 24 rules that make a book look like a book and not like a Word file. And there's a lot to that because the language doesn't always cooperate to the book page design rules that we have to adhere to. So that's a task.
So, yeah, okay. So that's actually making it a lot more clear to me. So it's really about making the whole inside of the book, every page inside the book, look visually appealing, and also make it, I assume that it makes it easier to read. If it's, I can just imagine if everything was higgledy-piggledy, like in a Word document or something, that would make it really hard to read.
The reading comprehension is the reason for meticulous typesetting because minute spacing variations like tight and loose lines or paragraphs that end in half a word or a line of type at the end of the paragraph at the top of a page, that all slows the reader down and impedes their comprehension. So we attend to all of those things so that doesn't happen. One of the rules, as an example, is we don't hyphenate a word on the last line of a right-hand page because the reader would have to hold that thought in their mind as they turn the page to get to the back end of that word. And that's a distraction. So we try to avoid that.
That's really interesting. So, okay, curiosity question again. So do you do a lot of that yourself or do you have people who help you with that? In terms of, I'm just thinking about the type of person who would enjoy that sort of work. What kind of background would they have?
They have to be trained in typesetting, of course. And it's weird because I love typesetting. I know how to do it. And some people would consider it unbearably tedious. But once you get in the flow, it becomes like a Zen experience. And it can be actually quite pleasant to do. Depends on the person.
Yeah, fair enough. So I'm curious if somebody was going, oh, that sounds like an interesting kind of type of job to have, doing, you call it typesetting, whatever you want to call it, formatting the book so that it's easily readable. What kind of experience do they have to have?
Mostly it's on the job training because you have to learn the standards wherever you're working. I suppose you should take a course maybe in Adobe InDesign, but even that, just knowing the software isn't enough. You have to know what to do with the software and why you're doing the things you're doing. We'll get some InDesign files in here that are just dreadful. And the person who built the file didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah, fair enough. So I'm just curious because I know people oftentimes will listen to the podcast who are still either they're still career hunting or they're looking for something new or different to get into. And that is a skill set that I hadn't even thought about or considered. Yeah.
I can say there's an awful lot of work out there because something like 2 million books were independently published in 2022, I think it was. So somebody's got to do them.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So if somebody was thinking, oh, I'd really like to learn how to do that, is there a place they can go? You say it's on the job experience. So is there a name for this type of role or?
You would call it a typesetter.
A typesetter.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Or maybe a little bit broader than that, a book designer, if you want to be the person that decides what the pages are going to look like first before you typeset them.
Okay, that
can be one job or it can be 2 levels where the designer just comes up with the ideas and then a typesetter executes it for 400 pages or so.
Yeah, making sure it's laid out and looking really good. I want to touch again on one other thing before we start to wrap up. And this is something that I think more people are probably aware of because people are looking at book covers all the time. If you're an author and you've written all of these words and you've put them together, sometimes people are also good at design and book design as well, cover design. But I would suspect, would it be true to say that lots of people aren't that great at book design or cover design? How do you go about that?
Cover design is much more difficult than it looks. I'll put it that way because typography has to be great. The images have to be great. The composition has to be great. It has to look like a traditionally published book. And that's a lot harder to pull off than you would think, right? To get all those elements right and together. So I always recommend hiring a designer who's been trained and who has the experience to do that. Now, one trick you can use if you're looking for a designer is to open up their portfolio in one window of your browser and open up the major publisher books in another window. So you can immediately see what level that designer is working at and whether or not the covers are as good as what you see the major publishers doing.
So I'm going to ask a process question first. I've got another question. For a cover design, you said there's iterations back and forth. How does that work when you're working with somebody? You've got somebody in your team creating book designs. Is it totally up to the author to decide which one they're going to go with? How does that whole process, the back and forth side of the process, go when somebody's getting a book cover designed?
We start with research into what the cover should look like if it's going to fit in with the bestsellers that are similar. And so we'll do typically 3 very different concepts, not 3 covers that look the same except the background color is different or something tiny like that. We do 3 very different concepts. And then from that, the author can choose which direction they like best and then start iterating from there about what they might like to see. And what we do is we understand the author has a vision and may have some preferences, but we will push back a little if the author starts saying things that are going to unravel the design. We try to prevent that whenever we can.
Yeah, because you would have a pretty good sense now in terms of the different designs that have been created over the years, which ones work really well and which ones don't.
Yeah. It doesn't take much to unravel a design. For example, if you say, I want my name bigger or I want the title to be in Lucida Sans or something like that. It may be your favorite font, but that's not the right reason to use it on your book cover.
Yeah, which leads me to my last question. I love children's picture books, right? And I love the way that the text intersects with the images because the two of those things together create a synergy that's more than just those two things together. How do you do that with a book cover?
Same thing, right? And again, it starts with the research. A thriller looks different than a cookbook or a history book or a children's book or a memoir. And if you just do that research first, then you can pick appropriate fonts and appropriate images and color palettes, right? For example, spiritual books will often be designed with pastel colors, bright, airy, and it tells the reader or the buyer, we have good news inside this book. You're going to feel better when you read this book. Whereas a thriller is just the opposite. Lots of red and black and shadows and big, bold, blocky type. And it tells you that I'm going to be clenching my fists as I read this book. So it's all about making the cover match what's inside the book visually. And everybody judges a book by its cover, whether we want to admit it or not. The cover is what makes people stop and learn more. After that, the book may not be for them. We can't control that, but our job is to make them stop.
That is really interesting. Very interesting. Michele, thank you so much for being here on the podcast and answering all of my curiosity-based questions. If people were interested in finding out more about you or interested in getting your help, or maybe even just getting in touch, where would they go?
My website is 1106design.com. And if you go there, I will give you a copy of my little book called Publish Like the Pros, which will go into some detail that we discussed here. And you can download it for free in PDF format. And I do want to add that if you contact us, we'll have a nice, friendly telephone conversation with you. We do not engage in high pressure tactics. We're not going to start sending you 5 emails a day and pound you into submission. That's not the way we work. It's professional service, one pro to another, and we believe in doing business that way.
That's good to know. And I'll put the links into the show notes so that people can actually reach out to you if they would like to do that. Michele, thank you so much. It's been fascinating.
Thank you, Trudy. This has been great.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope Michele's stories about what's involved in the journey from manuscript to a beautifully published book have inspired you to consider self-publishing. I really loved hearing about her early days in publishing and how she had to adapt when technology threw the whole industry for a loop. And that's a subject that we could be talking about a lot more these days. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe. So thank you for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode.